My friends, a few weeks ago, I shared with you my great love for astronomy. There is a second great love I have, one that has come into my life in the latter years, these last few years, and that is a love of history. For when I was younger, I labored basically under this misconception that history is just a narration of events and facts, and quite frankly, as a student, I found it quite boring and quite difficult to do and to learn. But only in the last perhaps 10 years did I come to a really deep understanding that history is actually the narrative of the human experience. That history is really the expose of the human heart and its challenges, its triumphs, its sufferings, and all that it may have to face in order to choose and to make events happen. That may sound almost simplistic, but the truth is many of us, even when we look at the religious history of our own faith, gloss over some of that human anguish and that human element that makes history so much more relevant to you and me. I speak, of course, of St. Paul himself, who makes this startling claim in the epistle to the Romans that he is the apostle of the Gentiles. Remember, this is the same Paul who in Corinthians describes himself as a Pharisee among Pharisees, one who is zealous to follow the law. And yet, in the revelation that he had of Christ in his life, coming to understand, among many other episodes, what the Lord actually was doing in the gospel by reaching out in mercy to a woman who was not Jewish in an area that was mostly pagan. Paul, in the anguish and struggle and challenge that he must have endured in a very deeply personal way, came to surrender to that truth and understand that God's love and mercy is destined for every person made in his image and likeness. And he was the one, among others, chosen to be the vessel to invite all people, even the Gentiles of his time, who were seen to be outside the covenant and outside of salvation. He went to all people to proclaim this joyful, liberating, one could say intoxicating message that God's mercy knows no bounds, is not afraid to go into the shadows of the world. Remarkable. Now, you and I, 21 centuries later, I'm sure there is no one among us who would dispute the fact of this basic revelation of Christian faith, that Christ came as Savior of all people, of all humanity, and God's love is meant to be shared with all, offered to all. But if we were brutally honest, and I'm going to invite you to do that today, we may understand it here, but I'm not exactly sure we live it here. Sometimes overtly, sometimes more subtly, we still create division. We still restrict God's generous love. We still create haves and have-nots. In an overt way, we as a nation and as a people of faith continue our journey to confront the evil of racism in our midst, where people simply because of the color of their skin or the country of their origin have been denied basic equality and the opportunities that other of us have had and those who came before us have had opened to them. Consider the sin of anti-Semitism, which many Christians in the past and perhaps even now are guilty of. When in fact, the scriptures itself says that the gifts and call of God are irrevocable even for his chosen people. And even within the church, there is this growing sense of self-righteousness among many who are dividing themselves into groups and camps based on preference, based on their understanding of the tradition, And they, in some way, shape, or form, whether they realize it or not, in this very confused world in which we live, of which they are trying with the best of intentions to find a path where the church can be renewed and healed and grow. All of that noble sometimes have a basic attitude of self-righteousness. That it's not just this is a way to move forward, but this is the only way to move forward. And if you choose another portion of the tradition, another way to pray, another language to speak, then somehow you may be among the have-nots, because we are part of the haves. And very subtly, they realize the old adage that my father used to say, all men may be created equal, but some are more equal than others. My friends, in God's eyes, that's a lie. In God's eyes, we are all loved wildly, generously, irrevocably, because we are His children. And sometimes that's a hard lesson to live when we allow it to sit before us in the examination of our conscience, and how we treat others differently because of their religious sentiments, or because of the color of their skin, or even the religion they profess. But God invites us to be His instruments, to invite all God's children, wherever they may be found, to encounter Him, fall in love with Him, and respond to Him. My friends, I often wonder to myself when I look into the face of my great nephew and great niece, who are 3 and 5 years old respectively. I wonder to myself what the world will look like when they reach 61 years old, which is what I am. It will be very different. But they will still be teaching history, I'm sure. Probably in some space-age classroom with some other modern way of having texts, who knows. And 50 or 60 years from now, they will be reading the history of my life and yours, of this generation, and confronting all of the challenges we have, faced with this basic religious truth. I wonder to myself, when the history of this generation is written, when the history of my life and yours is written, what will they read?